Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni have been locked in a legal battle that keeps unfolding with new twists, and the most recent development might be the most critical. Yet Baldoni, who had filed a counter-complaint against Lively, had his claims mostly dismissed by Judge Lyman with a narrow window to refile. But as of now, it seems he has missed the deadline to submit that second amended complaint. And while his legal team had publicly stated they intended to refile, they failed to do so, which raises serious questions about their legal strategy or lack thereof. While some speculate it could be a 4D chess move, the more likely explanation appears to be either surrender or miscalculation. This failure effectively removes Baldoni as a plaintiff in the case and places full control of the litigation into Lively's hands, allowing her to either continue the lawsuit or withdraw it entirely, assuming she pushes forward. Her strongest claim remains retaliation under California law, which prohibits employers from punishing workers for speaking out about harassment or requesting accommodations. Lively alleges that after she raised complaints about harassment on set, she became the target of a coordinated smear campaign designed to destroy her career. Even though the harassment itself still needs to be proven, Lively can win a retaliation claim simply by showing she had a reasonable belief that what she experienced was unlawful and that the response from the Wayfarer parties was motivated by her decision to speak out. The problem now is that the most compelling evidence in her favor appears to be a trove of private text messages that were obtained under questionable circumstances. These texts were allegedly acquired via a subpoena issued by a mysterious lawsuit filed by a shell company called Vanzan Inc., which records reveal is linked to Lively and Ryan Reynolds. The Vanzan complaint filed against unnamed defendants and quickly withdrawn appears to have served no real purpose other than to obtain those text messages from Stephanie Jones, a former publicist involved with Baldoni. While subpoenaing documents through litigation is normally legitimate, the vague nature of the lawsuit, the use of DOE defendants, and the swift withdrawal make it look like a tactical move to avoid legal objections from those whose private communications were being seized. Legal experts say this could qualify as abuse of process under New York law, a civil offense where legal procedures are used for improper purposes. If Baldoni and the other Wayfarer parties successfully argue this point, a judge could rule that those text messages are inadmissible at trial, and that would severely damage Lively's ability to prove her retaliation claim, as those messages are currently her strongest link between the alleged harassment and the alleged smear campaign. Even worse, if it is shown that the text messages were confidential or privileged and were obtained outside standard discovery processes, Lively's legal team could be accused of ethical violations. The Vanzan lawsuit also aligns suspiciously with the timing of
because of that, because no one's noticing her and she's not able to notice anyone else because everybody is so closed off in their own eggs.
That Baldoni is no longer a plaintiff, he may be in a better position to challenge the use of those texts rather than rely on them for his own case, and that shift could change the trial landscape completely. Meanwhile, Jennifer Ella, former PR executive tied to the Wayfarer parties, has filed a motion to compel all documents related to the Vanzan case, including the subpoena emails and communications, which could expose the full scope of how the texts were obtained. If it turns out that Vanzan was used as a legal smokescreen to bypass discovery safeguards, it could spark sanctions against Lively's team and possibly weaken her case dramatically. This makes the retaliation claim a battlefield not just over workplace conduct but also over legal process and privacy law. The outcome of the subpoena fight may ultimately determine who wins the larger war between Lively and Baldoni, with the next major milestone being Lively's upcoming deposition, which Baldoni wants to be public and Lively wants to be confidential amid concerns about safety and media circus. The judge will have to decide not only where it takes place but who can attend and how it will be recorded or reported. The entire dispute is now not only about what happened behind the scenes of a movie set, but how far each side is willing to go to control the narrative and the process through which the truth comes out. And as the court date draws closer, one thing is certain: whatever happens in court will have ripple effects, not just for the parties involved but also for how legal battles involving celebrities are handled in the public eye going forward. As the legal drama deepens, Blake Lively finds herself in an increasingly complex position, where every move is scrutinized and every legal filing could have massive consequences. The retaliation claim at the heart of her lawsuit has potential power, but its success now hinges on factors that may lie beyond the facts of the case, and instead in how the evidence was obtained. If the court agrees that the subpoena issued through Vanzan Inc. was part of a sham lawsuit used to bypass due process, then the most damaging messages that support Lively's claims might be thrown out completely. The irony here is that These very messages helped shape public opinion, with the New York Times publishing them in a way that made the Wayfarer parties look calculated, malicious, and coordinated. Without those texts, her case shifts back to a he said she said narrative, which is harder to prove, especially when retaliation hinges on proving that the adverse action was motivated by a specific complaint or event. Meanwhile, the court may now need to examine whether Vanzan Inc. ever intended to pursue litigation at all. Since no discovery took place, no named defendants were pursued, and the case was voluntarily dropped just before the civil rights complaint was filed, and the media narrative began unfolding. If this was a way to quietly fish for damaging information that would otherwise be off limits, it could be seen as both unethical and unlawful. Even more concerning for Lively is that this legal strategy might create long-term consequences if a judge determines there was intentional misuse of the court's subpoena powers. Then any other evidence obtained through similar means could also be scrutinized or excluded from trial. On top of that, if the court deems the Vanzan subpoena to be an abuse of process, it opens the door for Baldoni or the other Wayfarer parties to file their own counterclaims for damages, arguing that their rights were violated through this misused litigation process. And this changes the chessboard entirely, because now Baldoni may have a fresh legal path to fight back without relying on his original claims that were dismissed, especially if he can prove that he was materially harmed by the leaked text messages which were used to publicly smear him. This means Lively's retaliation case is not just about whether she experienced harassment or not, but whether she used improper legal mechanisms to make her case stronger in public, and if so, whether the resulting harm to others now becomes a separate set of legal battles unfolding in parallel. Also in the background is the question of whether the Civil Rights Division complaint filed by Lively, which helped trigger this legal saga in the first place, could also be revisited by authorities if it is shown that her team acted improperly in acquiring evidence used in that filing, especially if that evidence formed the foundation for the claims of coordinated retaliation and defamation that gave the complaint its explosive weight. The possible fallout includes both civil liability and professional disciplinary action for any attorneys involved in structuring the Vanzan subpoena. And then there is the matter of the PR war, which continues to rage outside the courtroom, with both sides trying to control the narrative. Lively has been painted as a woman standing up against harassment, while Baldoni is fighting to defend himself against what he calls career-ending false allegations. But public sentiment could shift depending on how the subpoena controversy plays out. If the court finds it was a clear end run around privacy protections, the focus might move away from workplace misconduct and onto whether Lively's team manipulated the legal system for media advantage, and this could raise serious questions about how celebrity plaintiffs use their resources to tilt litigation in their favor, not only with legal filings but with coordinated press campaigns, social media leaks, and curated narratives in major outlets. And if courts start seeing this pattern more clearly, it could lead to new judicial guidance on how evidence obtained through questionable means should be treated, especially in high-profile cases involving fame, power, and media influence. And so we return to the present moment, where Lively's team is preparing for a deposition battle, arguing for privacy and safety, while Baldoni wants transparency and access, a microcosm of the larger conflict about control, information, and strategy, because behind every court filing is a bigger war about who shapes the public narrative and who gets silenced. And if those messages are excluded, then Lively's retaliation case may become harder to win, which would mark a major reversal in what had appeared to be a strong legal position. As the spotlight remains fixed on the unfolding courtroom drama, new layers continue to emerge that raise the stakes for both sides. While Blake Lively initially appeared to hold the upper hand with public sympathy and legal momentum, the collapse of Justin Baldoni's counterclaims and the sudden silence from his legal team has left many wondering if this was a retreat or a recalibration, with Baldoni now potentially repositioning himself not as a plaintiff, but as a victim of legal process abuse. The narrative is shifting subtly but powerfully. His team may now pursue an abusive process claim centered around the mysterious Vanzan Inc. lawsuit, a case that was filed without specific facts, dismissed quietly, and used as a vehicle to extract damaging private communications. And while the subpoena may have delivered the text messages that helped shape the public's perception of Baldoni and his allies, it may now also serve as the basis for a serious counteroffensive. If Baldoni can show that these messages were obtained improperly and were then weaponized in the media, he could claim reputational and financial harm, especially given the backlash that followed their publication in the New York Times and the California Civil Rights Division complaint. And so the legal front is expanding from a retaliation case into a much broader war over privacy, due process, and strategic misuse of litigation tools. And this brings renewed focus to the motion to compel filed by Jennifer L., who is seeking full disclosure of the communications surrounding the Vanzan lawsuit, including emails, text drafts, and internal memos. If her motion succeeds, the resulting discovery could expose whether Lively's legal team coordinated the timing of the subpoena with her media strategy and legal filings, and if it turns out that there was a deliberate effort to avoid standard legal objections and circumvent the rights of third parties, the implications could be serious, not only for the current lawsuit but for how courts handle similar tactics in future celebrity cases. This is especially true given the growing concern in legal circles about powerful litigants using shell corporations and vague complaints to access private data under the guise of legitimate litigation, and if judges begin to view this as a pattern rather than an isolated case, it could lead to new procedural safeguards and sanctions aimed at curbing misuse of the courts. And in the middle of all of this is the looming deposition, which may either clarify or further inflame the case. Lively's team is fighting to keep it private, citing safety concerns and potential media exploitation, while Baldoni's camp argues that transparency is essential, especially if Lively is using the legal process to both litigate and shape public opinion behind closed doors, and the judge now must weigh those competing arguments in a way that protects the integrity of the process without granting either party an unfair advantage. Because the deposition may include questions not just about the alleged harassment and retaliation, but about how and why certain evidence was obtained, how it was used, and what role various legal operatives played in creating a narrative that was then presented to the public as fact, and the credibility of that evidence is now in doubt. Because the text messages, while damaging, do not contain direct admissions. Instead, their interpretation is subjective and without proper context. They could be viewed as misleading at best or defamatory at worst. And if a judge agrees that these messages were obtained via a process that violated due process rights, then Lively may be barred from using them at trial, or forced to severely limit their scope, which would cripple her ability to prove retaliation, since she needs to show that the Wayfarer party's actions were motivated by her complaints about misconduct. And without those messages, that connection becomes speculative. Further complicating matters is the ongoing defamation suit filed by Stephanie Jones against Jennifer L., which also hinges on the origin of those same messages, since Jones is accused of unlawfully extracting data from her employee's phone and handing it off to Lively's team. The resolution of that case may also affect what evidence is admissible in Lively's trial, and the overlapping nature of these lawsuits creates a tangled web of claims, counterclaims, and procedural disputes, each capable of tipping the scales in unexpected ways. And so while the public may be watching for headlines about depositions and courtroom showdowns, the real war is happening in the shadows between competing legal strategies that aim to control not only the facts but the very rules of engagement. And it is becoming clear that the outcome of this case may rest less on what happened on a film set and more on how far each side was willing to go to shape the narrative around it. As legal teams dig deeper into each other's strategies, more questions are rising about the use of influence, money, and media power in shaping the case. And while Blake Lively's retaliation claim once appeared solid, the closer one looks, the more fragile it becomes, especially if the evidence supporting it is disqualified due to procedural misconduct. At the heart of this is the growing controversy around how those crucial text messages were obtained, which now appears to involve not only a possibly sham lawsuit but also potential violations of digital privacy laws, given that the text reportedly came from a former employee's phone under questionable circumstances. The legal spotlight has widened from retaliation to issues of data ethics and third-party rights, and that shift could alter the course of the trial entirely, especially if judges determine that the information obtained was...
I have someone very, very close to me in my life who's gone through what Lily's going through for a long time, and I've been on the front lines helping her navigate that space. So that movie meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
And it means a lot to her, this person in my life, and it was one of the reasons
they argue that
me doing that film...
The legal process was reverse-engineered, meaning that evidence was gathered first through back-channel subpoenas, and that claims were later built around that evidence, rather than the other way around. If they can prove this narrative with documented timelines, emails, and internal communications, they may succeed in painting Lively's case as procedurally corrupt, even if factually plausible. Meanwhile, Jennifer L.'s motion to compel surrounding the Vanzan subpoena is expected to produce documents that may reveal how the shell company was formed, how the complaint was written, and what discussions occurred around its filing. If those documents show that the case was constructed solely to gain access to messages, and not to seek legitimate redress of harm. That would almost certainly support an abuse of process claim and potentially discredit large portions of Lively's case in court. Not to mention the reputational fallout if it becomes clear that one of Hollywood's most prominent stars used shell corporations and backdoor subpoenas to obtain private communications from former colleagues. It could reshape how the public and future jurors see the case moving forward. Meanwhile, the deposition saga continues to loom large, as the legal teams argue over location, scope, and publicity, while Baldoni's team wants full access. Lively's attorneys argue that increased exposure could pose security risks and lead to leaks that prejudice the case before trial. But behind this public argument is another quiet concern. If Baldoni's team can question Lively under oath about the Vanzan subpoena and the acquisition of the text messages, it could result in testimony that either strengthens their abuse of process claims or weakens Lively's credibility, depending on how much she knew or approved. And so the stakes of the deposition have never been higher, not just as a procedural checkpoint, but as a pivotal moment where one misstep could derail the entire case. And the legal system now faces a crucial test in handling this delicate intersection of privacy, celebrity, and justice, because this case is no longer just about whether misconduct happened on a movie set. It's about how far each party went to shape what the world believes about that misconduct and whether those methods crossed ethical or legal lines. And with every court filing, more questions emerge about the ethical boundaries of modern litigation, especially in high-profile celebrity disputes, where narratives can be shaped just as much by headlines and leaks as by hard evidence. And with a trial date potentially approaching faster than expected, judges will soon have to make critical rulings not only on the admissibility of evidence, but also on whether certain procedural maneuvers were abuses of power, and if so, what consequences should follow. And if Lively loses access to the messages, or if her team is sanctioned, it could drastically weaken her position in court and possibly turn public sympathy away from her. And if Baldoni is successful in establishing an abusive process, or even causing a mistrial due to procedural misconduct, he could regain leverage even after losing his initial claims. And the outcome of this will not only determine their personal reputations and legal outcomes, but could set precedent for how legal strategy and privacy intersect in the age of celebrity lawsuits, online campaigns, and media pressure. And so, as cameras continue to watch and fans speculate from afar,
Second only to this star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Cut me some slack here. You make everything better. I mean, absolutely everything in my life better. You've given us two of the most incredible children that I could ever hope to have.
Every revelation about subpoena misuse, evidence handling, and media manipulation now weighs just as heavily as the original claims of harassment and retaliation. What started as a case about misconduct on the set of a romantic drama has evolved into a legal chess match where strategy, timing, and narrative control are just as vital as the facts themselves. And at the center of it all is the looming question: will the court ultimately allow Blake Lively to use the text messages that appear to support her retaliation claim, or will Justin Baldoni successfully argue that those messages are fruit from the poisonous tree obtained through unethical and possibly illegal means? The answer to that question could reshape the entire case, because without those texts, Lively's strongest legal weapon may be rendered inadmissible, and her case may no longer survive the scrutiny of trial. This puts immense pressure on her legal team to justify the subpoena process that led to the release of those private messages, especially now that multiple lawsuits, including Jennifer L's and Stephanie Jones, are zeroing in on how that data was obtained. Meanwhile, Baldoni stands poised to flip the narrative. He could go from the alleged aggressor to a victim of weaponized litigation if the abuse of process claim gains traction. This could open the door to a countersuit that not only seeks damages, but also targets the reputational harm caused by the orchestrated media fallout that followed the Curd complaint and the New York Times article. And if the public begins to perceive the retaliation claim as built on a foundation of manipulated media narratives rather than solid facts, the case could implode under its own weight. And yet Lively still has options. Even if the text messages are excluded, she may be able to present other forms of evidence: internal emails, communications, timelines, witnesses, and context to support her claim that she was punished for speaking up, but without the anchor of the messages that shaped the public conversation. Her legal team will need to shift strategies and rebuild the case from its core. Meanwhile, the judge is facing mounting pressure, not just from the lawyers, but from the growing public. Scrutiny of every legal move. Every hearing now brings new headlines. Every ruling is dissected and debated. And as the trial draws near, the judge's decisions on evidentiary matters, subpoenas, and deposition boundaries could shape not just the fate of this lawsuit but set a broader precedent for future high-profile cases involving digital evidence and celebrity influence. The final stretch of this litigation may also bring surprises. Baldoni's team may still have cards to play, including seeking sanctions, calling for a mistrial, or presenting new evidence tied to the origins of the Vanzan subpoena. And Lively's team may preemptively offer settlement discussions to avoid further damage, or push for expedited trial to maintain narrative control. It all depends on what the next few hearings reveal, and if either side has been holding back crucial information. The final days before trial are when they will make their move, but no matter the legal outcome, the case has already exposed fault lines in the way high-profile lawsuits unfold in the digital age, where fame can be both a shield and a sword, and where public perception can influence legal momentum in ways never seen before. Both sides have played the media, both have used legal tools to shape headlines, and now the court must untangle the story from the strategy to determine what really happened and who, if anyone, broke the law. And so, as the final motions are filed, as deposition transcripts are reviewed, and as the trial date inches closer, the question that remains is not just who will win, but whether justice can prevail when the courtroom is only one part of the battle. The Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni legal war is more than a lawsuit. It is a case study in how power, privacy, and process collide in the era of celebrity litigation. And by the time this ends, we may not only know who was right and who was wrong, but also what rules will govern the next battle to come.